Mike Tyson became the undisputed heavyweight champ with a 12-round decision win over Tony Tucker, adding the IBF belt to the WBC and WBA belts, obviously the three-belt era at that time. It ended the heavyweight World Series that Don King had with HBO, etc. What else on the nostalgia meter? It was not a memorable, phenomenal fight. Historically significant, yes, but there's not anything really memorable from that actual fight, I don't think.
That's why it's so weird to me, because so many of those Tyson fights were so explosive, and you remember the big knockouts against Berbick when he won the title, or later on against Michael Spinks or something. Even the Pinklin Thomas fight that was right before this fight, Mike looked absolutely like a devastating, just a dominating, unbeatable heavyweight. Pinklin Thomas was a really good fucking fighter. People forget that, and Mike Tyson just beat the shit out of him. And so when he goes the distance with Tony Tucker in a fight that was, like you said, not the most exciting. Tony was a little bit taller, never really got hit with the big bomb.
Grappled him a bunch, made for a boring fight. Yep.
So now, when this fight concludes, the explosive Tyson, in this brief period, though, in a 3-fight in a row, he had gone a distance in a bad fight against Bone Crusher Smith when he unified the WBC and the WBA titles. That was a bad fight. Then he had the great performance against Pinklin Thomas that we looked unbelievable, just outstanding. And then added yet another kind of stink bomb against Tony Tucker. So at that time, now we look back and we're like, oh, Tyson, first title reign, devastating, legendary, just rolling through everybody. But if you're in the moment, in that brief 3-fight period, there was a lot of people questioning, like, is Tyson legit? Is he real? Because he had a distance fight in a kind of a bad fight against Bone Crusher. And then the same thing happened against Tony Tucker. So that's why I always preach that people, you can't get too caught up in the moment. You have to kind of take the longer picture, that you can't make a career assessment of a short group of fights. So, I don't like to rank a guy when he's still in his prime or in his active times, because it's not fair. And it was the same thing. If you were saying to people after the Tucker fight, even though Mike had become undisputed, that he was going to be, one of the most famous, iconic fighters ever, and he was one of the most exciting fighters ever, people would have said, yeah, I don't know about that. He just had look bad in those last 2 fights. But that's why you got to let it play out, because in the next fight, by the way, he fucking absolutely pummeled Tyrell Biggs. And that was the fight where, he talked about driving his nose and his nose bone into his brain.
Oh.
And then, and then he beat Larry Holmes after that. And then came Tony Tubbs, a big knockout. And then came Michael Spinks, the apex of his career with the 91 seconds. So Tucker, was the last guy to go the distance with Mike for quite a while. But it was, like you said, it was a very historic victory, is the point.
The interesting subplot is that Tucker had beaten Buster Douglas in the air quotes semifinals of the Heavyweight World Series, the Buster Douglas, to win the vacant title. Else we might have seen Buster Douglas and Mike Tyson in 1987, and it would have been a different outcome. Oh, probably yes. But interesting that Tucker won that fight and then got the big payday with Mike Tyson. But
here's the interesting thing about that, TJ. Also, so he beats Douglas on an undercard of the Tyson fight.
Correct.
And he wins the IBF title. That was in May of 87. He only held the title for less than 3 months, because the fight with Tucker and Tyson was on August 1st. So he was IBF champion from May 30th of 87 till August 1st of 87. Like one of the shortest heavyweight title reigns in the history of the sanctioned body titles in heavyweight history. And that was his claim to fame. And so he immediately went into the title fight with Mike and lost, even though it was a boring fight and didn't get knocked out. It wasn't like anybody could sit there and tell you that fucking Tony Tucker won the fight. I mean, he lost, pretty lopsided on the cards, just that Mike didn't look so good.
And then later, did we not know Buster Douglas would get in front of Mike Tyson in February of 1990, but he did not for that August fight.